My name is Doug Ressler, and I am the senior pastor at Parker Evangelical Presbyterian Church. And we're here in Parker, Colorado, a little town south and east of Denver, in the metro area. And like a lot of metro areas, are experiencing quite a bit of turmoil, quite a bit of protests, demonstrations, unrest in the last several weeks as people respond to the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And what we're doing with these conversations is just having some conversations with different people from different walks of life. We're having conversations with people of color. We're having conversations with law enforcement officers, just trying to humanize what is often a problem where people get dehumanized. And I know that that's certainly taking place if you listen to the rhetoric around the country today. It's important that we listen to our law enforcement officers and hear a little bit of their story and hear what they have to say and how they've been experiencing what's been taking place the last few weeks. And so, Casey, why don't you share with everybody just a little bit of your story, those who don't know you?
Sure. Again, I'm Casey Dalrymple. Currently, I'm married to my wonderful wife, Heather. I have two daughters, Isla and Lola, who are 10 and 4. And I also have another one on the way in December.
Praise God.
I grew up in Parker.
Mm.
I am a Parker boy. I grew up in Pepsi. My parents are Carl and Judy, and I'm sure a bunch of people watching probably know them. Growing up in Parker, I went to Ponderosa High School, very active there, football, wrestling, student government. When I graduated there, I followed my dad's footsteps and went to University of Colorado, go Buffs.
I love that, brother.
And I went there on an Army ROTC scholarship, studied sociology. And then when I graduated there, I was commissioned into the Army as a infantry officer, a second lieutenant. Ended up doing 2 tours in Iraq with the 10th Mountain Division. Then decided to get out of the Army and moved back to Parker. There was this little thing called a recession going on that I wasn't
Right.
aware of.
Right.
Took quite a while to find a job, but I had found a career in law enforcement. And we moved to Las Vegas, and I've been with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for almost 10 years. I spent most of my time in uniform working our inner city areas that were historically, when segregation existed, were the historic Black neighborhoods of Las Vegas. Those neighborhoods later on became home gang turfs, and so that area that I worked was very violent. Had a lot of problems with Black street gangs, narcotics, prostitution, murders, drug trafficking. Just a very violent part of town. And coming from a Parker boy, it was a cultural shock. Working that area, and really opened my eyes to just different things that you just, growing up in Parker, you don't see or you don't realize existed, or you just start seeing the world from a lot of different people's points of view.
Yeah. Casey, just like sort of sitting there for a moment with what you just shared, I think because we get desensitized, I think, to violence, maybe because of video games or television or movies or whatever it is we see. It's one thing to see it like on a screen. It's another thing to experience it, to see it firsthand, like you've had to do over many, many years. And I mean, that's traumatic in itself for, I think, any human being. I don't care how tough you are. And you certainly are a tough guy. I mean, military, two tours in Iraq, right? I mean, you're not a shrinking violet. You're not, I mean, that's not who you are. And I know you a little bit, and I know that's not who you are. You're a man of faith, a man of great character. But even that has got to be so challenging day in and day out to walk into those environments and see what you have to see and try and process that. I mean, it's got to be traumatic.
Absolutely. I think any police officer will tell you that the absolute worst calls you go to involve children.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever children start to become involved, whether it's a child that's drowned in a pool, or parents that have abused or neglected their child until they were near death or died, or having to take children from parents, it's gut wrenching, especially being a parent myself. Um, that just weighs on you.
Mm.
Seeing shooting or homicide after homicide, um, and also just the day in and day out of we don't go somewhere because it's somebody's good day. We
Right.
arrive and deal with most people on their, what could be their worst day of their life.
Mm.
You arrive and people aren't necessarily rationally thinking. A lot of times they're emotionally charged. Rational, cool, level-headed thought is not what's going through. So as you arrive, somebody independent that has no idea what's going on and trying to sort through things, um, people tend to have built up emotion, and you now become an outlet.
Mm.
And they, pour whatever hate or bias. I can't remember how many times I've been spit on.
Wow.
Somebody swung at me. Um, and that's, you realize, that's a part of the job when you
Hmm.
sign up. But, you know, when you finish your shift and you hang up your uniform and take all your stuff off, you still take that home. You,
Yeah.
you can't just leave that in a locker room.
Right.
And week after week, year after year, that stuff builds up and it impacts on you.
Hmm.
And we do have a system. We have the PEEP, which is supposed to help officers if you need to reach out. But um, without faith,
Yeah.
without God and working through my faith, and even with my faith, it's a challenge. And managing that has been difficult, and it almost cost me my marriage at one point. Um, and so it's no wonder that so many cops are divorced
Mm.
or alcoholics or addicted to other outlets. It's very difficult to process and have a healthy outlet. Um, that stuff can build and wear spiritually. Um, for me, especially the last couple of years, I've come into Jim Ramos and his ministry. And one of the biggest things that's kind of hit me and helped me with a lot of this and the way I kind of take things daily. He talks about a callous heart, and we have calluses on our hands. Those form through friction over time and create dead skin. Well, as a police officer, it's very, very easy to have a calloused heart because you go through that scenario like I was describing, and you do that multiple times a day, every week. And pretty soon you just want to be dead with emotion, and it's easier just to not feel, not get emotionally charged, because a lot of times if you get emotionally charged, that's how you lose control. So how do you break that down? And for me, I work through several different things. Small groups, being in community, with fellow Christians. I've recently gotten into a small group that we were talking about with a group of men that during the quarantine we've just been meeting through Zoom, and we have a study. But ways that constantly get me into the Word, get me praying. I use an app by Gary Eldridge called Pause. A great way to get in some prayer, some meditation, just try and get my head right, and make sure that my heart is in the right spot. One of the biggest things is to remember that compassion,
Yeah.
and that just that humanity. Remembering that everyone that you're dealing with is somebody's daughter, somebody's son, somebody's brother. Keeping
Yeah.
that
Absolutely.
that human portion.
Mm.
And then the golden rule, you want to be treating them just like you would want to be treated. Or
Mm.
if my family were to come in contact with an officer, I want to treat everyone I come in contact with the way I expect an officer to treat them.
That's really so good, Casey. I mean, you said a lot there about how your faith informs your work and the necessity of it, and again, the challenge of it. Like you said, how do you treat everybody you meet as made in the image of God? As you would want to be treated. Some people might listen to that and say, "Man, that is so challenging and so hard. Why in the world would anyone ever want to go into law enforcement?" And so maybe take us back if you can. The cops that I've talked to over the years, most of them go in with a heart to serve. They really want to do good. They really want to make a difference. I mean, was that a lot of your story as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Mine goes back to September 11th, 2001. Was a sophomore in college, knew I was going to be in the Army. I remember that spring coming out of an ROTC class, and I think it was the USS Cole bombing that had happened. And I remember talking with my classmates thinking, man, you ever think we're actually going to be in a war? And then September 11th happened. We all knew that it was no doubt. When I originally was going into the Army, I wanted to be a helicopter pilot, but September 11th happened. War was imminent. A lot of my friends were the first ones that were to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And during that time, somehow the calling of being on the front line in the infantry, being something that had been there and people had joined and stood that line and been the one saying, I will fight the fight and I will be the one in the face of the fury for generations, for hundreds of years. Something about that just called to me. And so I kind of changed my ideals in what I wanted to do in the military, and I was going to the infantry. Also heavily influenced by this guy you may know named Bud Sparling, who was an infantry officer in Vietnam, and who was somebody who was heavily influential on my life.
Amazing man of God.
So when I got out of the military, working in business or industry, that just was really never been a draw for me. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I'm not saying that at all. Just me personally, it just, I've never been one that pursuing money was a motivator for me. So my mom's family's actually got a lot of law enforcement in it. Her two brothers, my uncles, one's a retired Secret Service agent, one's a retired IRS criminal investigations detail agent. My brother's an FBI agent.
Right.
My cousin is a police officer. So that was kind of always a calling. It was never expected, but it was there. And then ideally, like you said, it's that call to serve. It's that call to think that you're going to be a part of something bigger than yourself. You're going to protect the weak. There's always that ideology that goes into it, and as you get seasoned in the career, you kind of sometimes scoff at it because, everyone coming in as an idealist with perfect views of how they think they're going to do it. And then you realize that you're never going to eradicate crime. You'll probably never see the fruits of your labor in this profession. You'll work tirelessly, but you'll never truly see the benefit. But I think I just go back to that image of 9/11 and who were running towards that building.
Yeah.
Firefighters and police officers. They knew the danger, but it didn't matter because people needed help. And they swore an oath to say, if something goes wrong, send me, I'll go.
Yeah.
Kind of
yeah.
like Isaiah 6:8.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, here I am, send me, right? I mean, that's what the prophet tells the Lord. And I think so important for people to hear. It's really a calling. It's not just, you could have done any job, but I mean, it's really, no, there's something that's drawn me to this. And the fruit is not, it's going to be tough to see fruit. I mean, you probably get glimpses of it here and there, but it's really, really challenging. And so that's a reality that I think, again, trying to help folks as they're listening, trying to process what they're hearing. I think all of these are just realities that I think so many of us are just oblivious to because we don't have to live your life. We don't have to do the things that you are asked to do on a day in and day out basis. So, I mean, maybe let's bring it forward to the present then. Obviously, over the last several weeks in the wake of George Floyd's death, we've seen just racial tension erupt in looting, rioting, protest demonstrations. Can you help us understand what that's been like to be an officer? Is there any way you can kind of give us a little bit of a window into what that experience is like?
Yeah, so I would say, today's climate has been building for years. It's not something that just sparked from the death of George Floyd, though obviously that's a catalyst. What I've described before and what we go through on a daily basis at work, you sign up for a lot, and a lot of people say it's a career, and you sign up for it and you knew what you were getting. Well, I don't think you always know what you're getting because you go in with an ideology and you never know what you're getting into until you're
Right.
into
Right. Right.
it.
And that doesn't make it, the other thing about that, a comment like that is I always tell folks, it doesn't make it easy.
No,
Right. I mean, just because, even if you did know, it doesn't make what you're going through any less difficult. It doesn't make what you're going through any less traumatic. And so, nothing prepares you for that.
sure. I mean, we had 1 October here just a couple years ago, and I was actually off duty at the time. As you can probably tell,
Hmm.
I don't wear a uniform now. I'm a detective.
Right.
1 October hit. It was my day off, 10 o'clock at night, getting ready to go to bed, and text messages start pouring in. And there was no doubt. I said, Heather, I gotta go. See ya. Put on my clothes and left. And the thing is, this is a career where when you say goodbye to your spouse and your kids, you don't know that you're coming home that night. And I know, anytime we leave our home, you don't know because you could be in a car accident. But we're voluntarily facing a lot of danger. We've had officers shot at just sitting in their car, going to a call for service. We've had officers that have illegal substances put in their food when they're eating,
Mm.
spit in your food when you're eating. Um, um, that stuff has been around, but
Mhm.
it just seems like the vilifying of the police has increased. That's just my personal opinion. Um, However, I do realize that the police become a symbol of
Right.
something larger than just
Right.
police officers. We
Yeah.
become a symbol of the state, of the prisons systems, the family and child protective service systems. Um, we become a representative so much more that people have frustration with, and we end up taking the brunt of that.
Yeah, you're the target of easiest opportunity. They're the ones that are interface. They can't interface with quote unquote the judicial system, but they can
Sure.
interface with a cop. You
Well,
know,
you
you
can't.
know.
Yeah, you can't drive down the street and say that's a lawyer,
Right.
that's a judge, that's a
Right.
public defender.
That's right.
Um, so yes, we're the easiest ones to put a
Mhm.
mark on. But you start to feel betrayed a little bit with so much vilification. We've signed up. The other thing about what you're doing at work is also just the schedules of our work, and I know firefighters can attest to that as well. We work odd hours. I work very odd hours. I miss a lot of time with my family. So I'm not the only one that has to pay the sacrifice. My wife and my children are as well. I've missed multiple birthdays, holidays, special occasions, concerts. I try and make an effort to be at those, but regardless, when you don't work 9 to 5, you start to realize how much the world revolves around a 9 to 5 schedule. That schedule can become, pretty hectic when your family really has to work to revolve around that and cater to that. So you start sacrificing a lot of those things, and then you see the news vilifying what we do. I've been to the homicide scenes. I've been to the big crime scenes. I've sat in the briefings. I know the facts of the case, and I've come home before and then turned on the news and then seen what the news is portrayed as what has occurred. And some of the facts, yeah, the facts are straight, but then it starts to be wordsmithing. And how do we twist this with words to make it seem like maybe this was more dramatic or more controversial than what it really was?
Yeah. So that like you said, the frustrations of having to watch. You're putting your life on the line day in and day out. Your family's making all of these sacrifices. And then how it often gets portrayed, the distrust in the media, the distrust in the community, the things that you have to endure day in and day out. Um, and then of course, not to mention, seeing your fellow officers put in danger. Like you were saying before, you can see, hopefully people that are listening can see how easy it would be to get that calloused heart and just be dead to the world, just as a coping mechanism. How does your faith help you process? How does your faith give you hope? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I kind of hinted at that before, but it's why, for me personally, it's so important to be a part of community, Christian community, have that connection. It helps to have other Christian cops, because they can definitely relate. You put all those different tensions and difficulties, like I mentioned before, just from the work, and that's going out and dealing with members of the public. But then add in on top of that the stress of your coworkers. We're not all the same. We're not stormtroopers. So just as anyone has in their workplace, you have conflicts with people you work with. You have people from different faiths, different backgrounds working together. My point being is that, yes, we're all still people. And so we still all have all that same office drama on top
Mm-hmm.
of all the drama that we might incur, or the emotion that we might incur through the course of our workday and what we do. Then, just to stir that in, put in the politics that you get from the chain of command and different things. They want to see this, or they want to say that, or they take away this, but then they ask you to do more. That really can tie in and just be so challenging and wear you down. Like I had said before, that it really wore me down to the point where my marriage was in big trouble. But luckily I have a very patient and loving wife, and just really through accountability, through prayer, trying to stay in the word as much as possible, doing things like studies with my men's group helps me get into the word and just stay there. It's just really kind of listen to the Holy Spirit. For me, a lot of times my drive into work, I used to listen to the radio. A few years back, I stopped listening to the radio, and I took that time to kind of have quiet time to pray. I started doing things like praying prayers of asking God, like, I know this is going to be stressful. I know this is going to be hard, but I know you're shaping me. I know today may seem difficult or unbearable or brutal, but please let me know that, and keep in mind and realize that this is something you're doing to shape in me. As I started to work more heavily in gangs, some of the gang members that I knew were sort of notorious and violent. I started praying for them on my way into work. I knew them by name. I knew who their families were. And I started praying for them, saying, God, I just pray that they would actually come to know you.
Wow.
Because I know they're on a path that they're either going to be in prison for a good chunk of their life, or they're going to be dead. And so I started praying for them. And so I know a lot of times it's easy to make it an us or them thing. And sometimes, in the police department, it's easy to say, all right, we're here, we're going to go out and we're going to set forth, and they're the bad guys. It's cops and robbers, right? Good guys, bad guys. But it's never that simple. It's never good guys and bad guys. Everyone's a family member to somebody else. Everyone's done some good in their life. Everyone's done some bad in their life. So that kind of helped soften my heart and remember that, hey, they're people too. They've got families that care about them and love them as well, just like mine that I left at home.
I mean, that's profound, Casey. I mean, that is what Jesus tells us to do, right? When he says praying for our enemies, praying for those who persecute us, praying for those, not just who we care for and are in our circles, but praying for those who are out of those circles and those who we're at odds with. And what a powerful testimony and a powerful witness that is, of how, I mean, that's amazing to me, Casey. What a testimony to what God has done in your heart, man.
It's a daily struggle, it's not like I did it and now I'm set free and everything's good to go.
No,
it is a daily, weekly struggle. Recently one of our officers, day 4 of rioting or protests that had turned into riots.
Mm.
Shea McLonis was trying to make an arrest while we were out there, and you know, unfortunate situation where it wasn't even a guy that was in the riots or protests, but somebody who was in a motel right along those the line of where they were traveling,
Mm.
inebriated, stepped out on the patio and fired a couple shots into the crowd and ended up hitting Shea right in the jaw. Went
Wow.
through his jaw and hit his spine and went down his spine.
Mm.
Um, that being the 4th night of watching um, protests that deteriorated into riots, and I have no issue whatsoever with peaceful protest for people wanting change or reform. Not one issue with that at all. But being somebody who I was in a unique situation with all that, I wasn't in a uniform on a skirmish line. I got to see it from a very different perspective. I watched thousands of people show up after peaceful protesters were done to join in what they saw was a crowd who was gaining momentum. And they weren't there. They didn't care about what the movement was. They cared about trying to fight police and trying to have a chance that in a mob mentality destroy what they want. Watching that for 4 nights in a row and it culminating with Shea get shot in the face, I came home at about 4 or 5 a.m. that morning with a black heart, just full of anger, full of rage. Enough was enough. Luckily, I'm at a point in my life spiritually where I knew I could recognize that, and I could just see this is bad, and I need to ask for help. And so I asked my men's group. I shot off a very early morning a text, apologized, said, "Hey, I need some prayers though, because I got a black heart. I'm mad. I'm mad like I haven't been in a very long time." Sorry.
No problem, brother. No problem. Take your time.
So I sent that text out, and I ended up just opening Facebook kind of by habit real quickly. And the second post, as I scrolled down, was a picture of a cross, and on that cross was John 15:12, which was, "My command is this: love each other as I have loved you." Whoa, I have a black heart. I just asked my group of Christian men for help, and I open up, and boom, that's the first thing I see. I was like, okay, I
Right.
hear you, God. Like, I will calm down. Like, okay. So I had my Bible open. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna take a few minutes and I'm gonna dive into the Word, because I think God's just telling me, hey, dive into the Word real quick. So I have my Bible open to Genesis from study we were working on. It was already sitting there. So I was like, I just looked down, and it was on Genesis chapter 4, which is Cain and Abel.
Yes.
So I start reading through Genesis chapter 4 real quick, which I don't know, it seemed fitting, Cain and Abel. And when I read Genesis 4:7, that kind of was the final real blow to me. And it says, "If you do what is right, won't you be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it."
Right.
So I just felt God saying, like, look, I just told you, love each other as I have loved you. Get rid of that anger.
Mm.
Put yourself in check. Get rid of all of that. This isn't an excuse to be mad. You need to put all that aside and remember where your faith is.
Mm.
So that was just a huge moment. And that was only just a couple of weeks ago, but that was a huge moment for me. I
That's
really
really,
felt
yeah.
God just absolutely laying that out for me right there.
Yeah, God's speaking to you really directly, right, to your situation. And like you said, you're watching all this go on in front of you, knowing you and your faith, as you've said so eloquently. Every single person you see, as someone's son or daughter, has a family. All of those things. You've really tried to humanize those you serve, even when they're really, really challenging to serve. But understanding on some level that all of us are brothers, and all of us, share this sort of common bond because we're made in the image of God. And And I think that really is what that Cain and Abel story is speaking to. And of course, in our moment, culturally right now, so many don't master their outrage and they don't master their anger. There are two kind of final questions. What would you want?
You kind of broke up a bunch there, but I did catch one piece, which was what would I want to express or have non-law enforcement people know or understand? Um, a couple things. One thing is, we are talking about you sign up for the job, you know what you're getting into, but what you don't understand is how it's going to change you. Nobody ever tells you how it's going to change you. I was in the Men in the Arena forum one time, and there was a young man in there. I asked, "Say, I'm thinking of being a cop. What do you recommend, or what advice would you have?" And I said, "Try not to lose your faith in humanity, because you're going to be taught that everyone you come in contact with is a potential suspect, is lying to you, is potentially dangerous to you, which is true in the job. When you have that uniform on, you have to have that mindset somewhat. You got to learn the balance of that and keeping your humanity. But over time, that mindset, if unchecked, kind of leads to that callous heart, like we said. But that's very easy to lose your faith in humanity. You learn all of the sort of ugly underbelly of society. You see it function. You see injustices that just grinds you down. Nothing. When you drive around, I guess a lot of times ignorance is bliss. When you drive around, you don't realize that house you just drove by is a meth den. This house over here is, got a child pornographer in it. But as a police officer, you go to those houses, you go to those calls, you start becoming hyper aware of what's going on around you as far as those things concerned. And it gets very difficult to really just even want to go out and kind of function in society. The second is the American police officer has been asked to do so much more than just enforcing laws. As police officers, we're asked to be counselors, we're asked to be advisors, we're asked to be mentors, to be guidance counselors to kids. We're asked to do, the scope of police work has expanded so much more than just enforcing laws. That makes the career kind of that much more complex. But we do it. We do it because we know it's in the best interest of the community. And that's, I think one thing that probably doesn't get expressed a lot is the scope of what police officers do through the course of their career for the community, rather than just, speeding tickets and domestic violence calls. It's a lot more. It's a lot more broad.
Yeah, that is I think something that hopefully people become more and more aware of, and even as they're putting together maybe even reforms, they can help lift the burden, off you guys a little bit, so that you're not having to fill all those roles, like you said, counselor, social worker. I mean, you name it, you guys are doing everything. And again, the burdens that you're carrying, the burdens that we're putting on your shoulders are just too heavy to bear on some level. So the last question I had, Case, really was just, how do we pray for you? How do we pray for your family? Tell us how we can, or maybe even if you've got a word, even with that, I mean, even if it's a word of encouragement to folks that, hey, when you interface or have the opportunity to interface with law enforcement, make sure that you encourage them, make sure that you bless them. Like how can we do that for you guys?
That's one thing that it's usually the silent majority. They back police, and just letting them know that you do. It doesn't take much. Just hey, thank you when you go by. Hey, we support you guys. And honestly, it's just that little bit that reminds you, hey, they support us, they love us. They understand that we're here. We want to help them. We didn't sign up to be what some of the media wants to portray us as. Nobody I know signed up and said, "Hey, I want to do that." So, one last caveat, and then, you know, even with guys that may get in trouble and get fired, I know guys, I've worked with guys that have had a bad lapse of judgment or have veered. It's no different than any other career path. There's pastors that morally get skewed and have a slow burn into.
Absolutely.
There's businessmen. The thing is, when it happens to a police officer, it gets put on the news.
That's right.
And it's easy to say they're horrible people, they're villains, they're awful. And yes, they did something bad. They made a bad mistake, but that's no different than the people that we deal with in the public who have made bad choices and are suffering the consequences. Something about police officers, they didn't go through that whole career not helping anybody. So my heart breaks every time I see somebody wearing a badge that has gone askewed, and they're going to suffer the consequences. I'm okay with that. My heart breaks that here's somebody who I know has helped somebody just through their job. Through the course, I know that at some point somewhere they've helped somebody, but they've obviously got it off skewed. So that's something, when you see something like that for law enforcement officers, just remember that they have helped somebody somewhere. They have done some good for somebody somewhere. As far as the prayers for me and my family, just, I don't think it's anything necessarily specific, but obviously patience, endurance, obviously safety, that we stay safe. We come home every night. That's always the first mission, and the primary mission of every day is to make sure that we come home to our families. We didn't sign up to be martyrs. For me, it's just compassion. A part of it is courage to share that compassion with others, to try and help melt others' hearts who might be hardened. And then for my family, just obviously they worry a lot. So for rest assurance for them.
Casey, as we close, I just want to really, one of the best things about that, again, I hope people walk away with as they listen to you, is the way you really humanize everybody, that you come into contact with, whether it's your colleagues on the line, even those who, like you said, they go off, the rails, and something bad happens, and yes, the consequences need to happen, but you've called us to remember that these are human beings. They're not. No one is all evil. No one is all good. It was the great Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who himself spent time in prison in a Russian gulag, who said that the dividing line between good and evil runs through every human heart. And so whether, again, it's your colleagues who are out there, or whether it's the people that you're coming into contact with, again, everybody has a story. Everybody's got family. Everybody deals with the brokenness of this world in different ways, and some people it really sends them sideways, and it's really traumatic. And then, of course, we all know hurt people, and so that's what ends up happening. And so your call to compassion is a huge one, and I just want to encourage everybody listening just to hear that call. And Casey, thank you so much for being willing to share so openly and honestly with us, brother. Know that people at Pepsi are going to be continue to pray for you and your family, for sure. You're a part of us, man. You're just extended family in another city. That's all.
I appreciate that.